Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our inspiring content. Here is episode 134.
The future of our planet depends on two things, as far as I'm concerned: raising great kids and figuring out how to raise great food.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Greg Peterson. Greg is an urban farming and sustainability innovator who is well known regionally. He has appeared extensively on local television and radio and is frequently a guest columnist for publications. His mission is to inspire people to embrace their own greenness, which he does daily by living what he speaks. Greg resides at an urban farm, an environmental showcase home in the heart of Phoenix, which he opens periodically for tours and classes. He runs urbanfarm.org and Urban Farm U, both designed to educate and inspire. As a resident of Phoenix for the last 48 years, Greg is well versed in urban sustainability and food production in dry lands. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here to learn from you today about urban farming. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I've lived in Arizona for almost 50 years. And for those of you that don't know it, Arizona is the desert and it's very hot. And when I was a preteen, I got very interestingly enough in fish farming. And I spent, at age of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, I was studying fish aquariums and fish farming in the middle of the desert. And then I spent the next 20 years of that time really exploring what's now called aquaponics. And then I shifted away from aquaponics into just growing food in the ground and, making sure that we knew how to raise our own food as a culture, because that's one of the things that we've lost. Decades ago, like 30% of the people were farmers. Now less than 2% of the people out there are farmers. And so our biggest challenge over the next 50 years is to create more farmers. And really that's what I do. That's my task in life, is to inspire people to farm.
Well, and most people don't even understand where food really comes from. So,
right.
I mean, it's
Food does not come from the grocery store.
Exactly.
Although that's where we can go pick it up.
One of the things that I love about your urban farming message is maybe they're more organic and more, healthier foods for us. But I love your story that's on his website. It's an amazing website that you need to go see. But why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about that story of how your journey led you to discover what you really love to do, like finding your mission?
Yeah, perfect. So the year is 1974. I'm in the 8th grade. However, I don't have kids, so I don't know how old an 8th grader is, but 12, 13 years old?
14 maybe.
14 years old, yeah, perfect. And I had to write a paper for my science class, and I wrote a paper on how we were overfishing the oceans. To this day, I do not know how me as a 14-year-old knew that we were overfishing the oceans. And through that process of, writing that paper and being 14, 15, 16 and looking at our food system, I discovered for myself in the mid-70s how wrong we are living on the planet, the way we're doing it, the way we're consuming everything on the planet, the way we're making food that no longer nourishes us. And so that launched me into basically a 40-year journey of recreating our food system. And that's really what I do now, is I teach people how to recreate their own food system. Then in 1981, now, you got to understand, in 81, it was way before this notion of sustainability was created. I put on paper a plan that created a fish farm. Remember, I liked aquaculture, which is fish farming, that created a fish farm that didn't have any negative outputs. So there was no waste coming out of this fish farm. And I was in college at that time, and so I took this plan to my professor at Arizona State University, and he looked at it and he said, "That's a stupid idea. It will never happen." And it absolutely crushed me.
Oh, wow.
I remember that moment. That was a crushing blow because this man that I looked up to told me that what needed to happen, and interestingly enough, what is happening now in 2016 couldn't ever happen. So that framed me out in two ways. First of all, it kind of threw some cold water on my idea and it slowed me down there. But I'm now a teacher, and I know that when students bring me ideas, no matter how crazy I think they are, I always encourage them.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, down the road, something could happen. And
right. Exactly. And by the way, I still have that plan from 1981 on paper. And then in 1991, I had a couple of really significant things happen. I did my first permaculture design course. I like to call permaculture the art and science of working with nature. So how do we observe nature and get in the flow of nature and work with nature rather than against nature like we human beings like to do? And the other thing that happened, I read a book that absolutely changed my life. It's called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And the book Ishmael is a conversation between a gorilla and a man. This gorilla talked to the man about how we came to be the way we are on the planet. And that book has completely framed out how I speak and am in the world. So the third thing that happened in 1991 is I did a weekend seminar where I was to define who I was on the planet. And in that weekend, I created myself to be the person on the planet responsible for transforming how we raise our food. And the cool thing for me is that has become my mission. And that's what I get to do every day is I get to teach people how to transform how they eat and where their food comes from. And then in 2001, I decided to call my urban farm here in North Central Phoenix the Urban Farm. And since then, it's become a place that people come and visit. We do tours. I don't do so much classes here anymore, but this is the studio that I'm talking to you from. And it's a third of an acre. It's 80 feet wide and 160 feet deep. I have about 80 fruit trees on the property.
Wow. Wow.
The entire landscape is edible, or it supports edible. So I don't plant things that can't be used for something else. Remember that model that I set up in 1981 that I told you about, that there were no external wastes?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I target to do here at the Urban Farm now, is that I make sure that everything that I generate stays on the property as best as I can. I can't always do that, but that's what I'm working toward. I'm working toward 100% no waste coming off of the Urban Farm. So that's my mission. That's, you can hear my passion in that. That's really what I do in the world.
Yeah. Well, and when I was reading about your story, it was really inspiring because, like you said, from the time you were a young boy, you've just been driven in this direction. I just love to hear that when people really, it comes to them, that inspiration comes somehow. But tell us a little bit more about maybe some challenges. You talked about the professor that kind of shot down your dreams. What are some other challenges you've had along the way, and what have you learned from those?
Oh my gosh. How many days do you have?
Did you have a green thumb when you grew up, even though it was there?
Pretty much. And here's the thing about a green thumb. A green thumb is a state of mind.
Well, I need to change the state of my mind.
Anybody can have a green thumb. Pick it. If you think you can kill plants, you can kill plants. And the truth of the matter is I have a green thumb. I know how to grow things. And I still kill things. It's just part of the process. That's how we learn. I don't view my failures as failures. I view them as learning experiences.
Well, and that's the cool thing with plants. They die. Right. You just do another one.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, today I killed two really precious plants to me, and I'm kind of kicking myself for it. And it's part of the learning process. It's part of, what we have to do. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I've had 29 businesses in 41 years. Some of them lasted 2 or 3 months, like they never got off the ground. A couple of them lasted for over a decade. I had one software company that I ran for 22 years.
Wow.
So I've spent a lot of time exercising the entrepreneur muscle. And in 2003, I started a company called Urban Farm Nursery here in Phoenix. And we were going to raise organically grown edible plant starts for people for their garden. And so in the fall, we decided we were going to raise 80,000 plants. So I set up the infrastructure. I spent the money. We planted the plants, we got everything going, and in January we had these beautiful 1-inch tall plants in 80,000 pots on the yard here and in a greenhouse here in the valley, so on and so on. And it was absolutely beautiful. And everybody wanted our plants, but they weren't big enough to sell yet. And in February, every weekend it rained. And nobody wanted our plants because nobody was gardening because it was raining.
Oh.
So I ended up giving away about 40,000 plants, lost about $30,000 on the deal. And one of my big takeaways for that is I need to start small. If we would have done that at 5 or 10,000 plants, I could have weathered that storm, so to speak, and everything, would have been fine. Although it turned out fine and it was a great learning experience for me. I have business failures like that I could share with you for the next couple of days.
Well, let's talk about maybe some challenges too with gardening. You're obviously in Arizona, which is extremely dry. I mean, if you've ever lived on the desert, you really can't grow plants on that soil. Give us some challenges that maybe you've helped people through in gardening as well. And is there a difference between just being a gardener versus urban farming?
So again, urban farming is a state of mind, because when you think about it, what do farmers do? That question's for you.
They just grow plants. I mean, they farm and create enough food basically to sell type of thing, right?
Or give away.
Right? Yeah.
But basically farmers are growing food, and they're growing an abundance of food to share. Share it by selling it, share it by giving it away, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're at home and you have Rebecca's cool urban farm and, you've grown enough food for your family. All right. So you're sharing it with your family and maybe a neighbor or two. Are you a farmer?
Yeah. I mean, if I can do that, sure.
Absolutely. So I've created this distinction, and it really started from a thought process I went through about 20 years ago. And that was from a marketing perspective. Do people want to see an urban garden or an urban farm?
Probably definitely in our urban farm, right?
Exactly. So that's really how the urban farm name came to be, is so that, people wanted to come and see an urban farm, but hey, there's urban gardens everywhere. And I think making somebody an urban farmer, taking on the moniker of urban farmer or urban farming, it adds more credibility to it, because now all of a sudden there's some intent behind it besides, I'm just gardening.
Yeah.
So that's what I teach. That's the bottom line of what I teach right there, is everybody can be an urban farmer. And a lot of people need to be urban farmers because we have a food system that is tenuous at best. And if food stopped coming into your town, you have about a 3-day window before the food runs out.
Yeah, it doesn't take long when Walmart's shelves start to dwindle.
Exactly. So, and I'm not proposing that we raise food because we're going to run out of food, but what if a lot of people learned how to garden or farm, and a lot of us were raising great healthy food, and something happened? Well, then, hey, we're covered. And if nothing happens and things keep going the way it's going, we've got all this great food growing everywhere.
It's definitely saving your grocery bill, if anything else. Yeah.
Exactly. So a challenge that we have here in the desert, we have this gnarly, bad soil. It's not, actually, I can't even call it soil. It's dirt. And you can't grow anything in dirt, although dirt is a really needed component of healthy soil. If you just have dirt, you can't grow anything in it. And this guy came to me. His name is Jake Mace. If you look him up online, his name is The Vegan Athlete. And he came to me 5 years ago and he said, Greg, he showed me a Google picture of it 5 years ago. He said, this is my backyard. It was 1/3 of an acre of dirt. He said, Greg, what do I do with this? I said, cover it with 6 inches of wood chips. So he took my coaching to heart. And in the past 5 years, he's put, according to him, 2,000 cubic yards of wood chips in his backyard. They're 1 foot deep. And what's happening is his dirt backyard from 5 years ago is now this incredible jungle. He's got over 200 fruit trees on the property. And his water bill, it's the desert. His water bill isn't all that high because he's got this amazing layer of 8 to 12 inches worth of water-saving mulch on the entire property. So mulch is absolutely the way to go. You want to put it on top of your garden, not in your garden, but it saves water. It builds healthy soil. It's one of the things that makes growing food here in the desert, and really other places too, but specifically here in the desert, really easy.
Wow. And is that why permaculture, maybe we should define that, and then maybe is that why permaculture gardens seem to thrive, because you've kind of got a layer there I don't know much about gardening. Help me out.
Yeah, so permaculture, I think I said this earlier, permaculture is the art and science of working with nature. It's a concept developed by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren 40 years ago, and they put it together in a book called Permaculture, a Designer's Manual and Introduction to Permaculture. And basically what they did is they looked at the systems that nature offers and then works in conjunction with them. So when you look at a forest, things grow in a forest, right? Mm-hmm. And there's nobody there to till or add mulch or anything like that. Leaves fall, stuff, accumulates over time. And what you get in a forest is this thick, rich layer of compost mulch that's in the forest. So what we did with this concept is we looked at forests and how they work. And we said, well, if that's the way a forest could work, what if we did a forest in our backyard that way?
Yeah.
So that's really making the connection between nature and permaculture in our yards. And what I tell people to do is spend some time in your yard and really in your neighborhood observing what's going on, and then start mimicking those things. Start mimicking what nature and really what the neighbors are already doing that's working.
Yeah. Well, and the animals and the wildlife, right?
Exactly.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I listened to one of your podcasts, and they talked about, how the chickens actually help with their garden and stuff like that. Yeah. And that is becoming a little bit more acceptable in the city, right? To have some backyard animals like that.
Oh, yes. In fact, we've got a backyard livestock free webinar coming up here real soon that people can find out about too. That's, I'll tell you about that more in a little while. But
all right.
Backyard livestock I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of at least chickens in your backyard. If you have a backyard, you should get chickens.
And do they, even in places like Arizona where it gets really hot, or maybe in Idaho where it gets really cold, you're still very supportive of that, right? Make sure they have cover. Okay.
Absolutely. And, in Idaho, you're going to do things differently than you are in Arizona. And what you have to do is you have to go figure out the appropriate things to be doing in Idaho. And you do that through the number one principle of permaculture, which is observation. You got to go out and observe and pay attention, see what's going on in the space to know what's going to work for you.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Tell us how you feel like your paradigm has changed over time and with experience. I really love to hear what people feel like they've learned through that time.
I think one of the big paradigm shifts that I've had, and this was an easier one for me, and that was that I'm not in charge. And that's a small I, like the me, and the large I, like humans. My friend Toby Hemingway, who wrote the book Gaia's Garden, says nature always bats last. And the more that we fight nature, the more that nature's going to fight us back. So once I got very clear about that, life actually has become easier. When I'm going with the flow, it's like, if you're trying to swim upstream, that's a lot of work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of the time, I don't swim upstream anymore. I just kind of go with the flow. If I need to go upstream, I figure out an easy way to do it.
Yeah. Let me try to reiterate what I think that you're saying, and then, either you can agree or deny. But so maybe what I'm getting from you, especially in the gardening context and in nature, is that, sometimes we'll have problems with water. Sometimes we'll have problems with the weather patterns or whatever, just like in your situation with growing those starter plants. And that if we just learn and accept that nature's going to happen, maybe it won't be so discouraging for us, right? That we can just pick up and start over again.
Yeah, that's a big piece of it.
Great.
So recently I had my 1985 Toyota pickup truck completely rebuilt from the ground up. So I've had it now for a month and a half, and I back into one of those short poles in a parking lot.
Oh.
And it didn't do a lot of damage, but it was enough to irritate me.
Yeah.
So here's a perfect example outside of the gardening arena. I could have gotten really angry, and what good would it have done me?
Yeah, you're just mad about something you can't control anyway, right?
Exactly. So I just had to take a deep breath and say, all right, well, it is a work truck, so I let it go. I didn't fight it. I just let it go and let it be.
Yeah. Now it looks like a work truck, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Before we go on, let's listen to this message.
Hey gang, this is Mark, producer of The Luminous Mind. The Luminous Mind has been on the air now for over a year. If you love this show and would like to vote for it for the Podcast Awards, go to the website theluminousmind.net and click on the link for Podcast Awards and nominate The Luminous Mind for your favorite show in the education category. Thanks, and have a great day.
Welcome back to the Luminous Mind with Greg and the Urban Farm. All right, so tell us a little bit more about the services you offer and maybe what successes you've seen. If you get on Greg's website, it is classes, you have a podcast. I mean, tell us about all of those things and kind of some successes, some testimonials maybe.
Perfect, absolutely. Let's start with the testimonials because it's right up front for me. I get daily emails from people about how well they're gardening, how it's working for them, thanking me for doing what I'm doing in the world. It doesn't build my ego. It feeds my
mission, maybe.
It really does. It feeds my mission. Thank you for saying that. It's what I'm here to do. And I thank people. I'm gracious and I thank people. And I say, well, that's what I'm here to do. And I will keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, and when you feel like that's your mission and you have somebody like your professor, that kind of poo-pooed on that really, I mean, like you said, that really hurt because it was a mission for you. So
yeah,
that's great. And then just tell us like the services. I mean, his classes alone just look so interesting.
Thank you. I have several things that I do. First, we have the Urban Farm podcast. This is a podcast I launched back in November. And we do a 3-day-a-week interview, usually lasts about 30 to 40 minutes, of different people doing cool things around the world in urban agriculture, food systems, authors, people like that. And, we've had great success. I'm really loving that. And one of the cool things for me is I get to interview these outrageously cool people out in the world. That's our Urban Farm podcast. Then every month, we do 1 or 2 or 3 free webinars. And these are our free webinars that lead to then our signature courses. So we have a Growing Food the Basic signature course that we give, which is a 7-week online class where we walk people through really everything that they need to know in order to grow food in their yard. And the 2 precursor webinars, the free webinars that we give to that, are standalone webinars. If somebody comes to one of the webinars, they're going to learn something. They're going to be able to take something away with them and go do something with it. So they're value packed. So that's what I do at Urban Farm U. And I think we're offering 6 different courses. We've got another 4 or 5 that we're launching this year. A 7-week aquaponics class. Toby Hemingway wrote Gaia's Garden, does a 7-week permaculture city class. We got Growing Food the Basics. We've got my Jumpstart Your Urban Farm class. Backyard Livestock launches next month. So we've got these cool titles that people can really learn a lot from. In fact, I'm committed to that. People take our classes, they get their life out of them.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you offer something free too, so they can check it out and see if that's something that they feel is beneficial to them. So
absolutely. And then locally here in Phoenix, I do a lot of classes. There's a farmer's market near the house here, and I do classes there. And 16 years ago, here's an interesting story for you. 16 years ago, I started teaching people about fruit trees. And 14 years ago, people started asking me, well, where do I get fruit trees? So I started my fruit tree education program 16 years ago, and I started selling fruit trees like 14 or 15 years ago. So in the fall of every year, I give away free fruit tree classes here in the Valley, both online and in person. And people throughout the fall then can pre-purchase fruit trees. So my goal 16 years ago of planting 500 fruit trees in the ground has turned into something where we usually sell about 3,000 to 4,000 fruit trees a year right now.
Wow.
And they come with the educational piece, which is so important.
Yeah.
People can actually, they can come take my classes, they can see my videos, and they can learn to, really how to be successful with fruit trees.
Yeah, that's an area that we struggle in because, you don't understand the cross-pollination.
Right, exactly.
It's pretty complicated.
Exactly.
So that's great. Well, and with your am I saying that right? The aquaponics. Mm-hmm. Do you help people start their own fish farming? I mean, what's behind that?
No. So what I do these days is I'm offering the courses. I'm getting people into a classroom so that they can learn how to do it themselves. I learned many years ago that if I go do it for someone, I'm not teaching them anything. And more often than not, because I used to install all kinds of things 20 years ago here in the Valley, gardens and ponds and that kind of stuff. And I found that more often than not, those things got neglected.
Yeah, if they don't understand how they're working.
But if people are interested enough to install it themselves, they're going to stick with it.
Well, and does that help with the watering and stuff of maybe your urban farm that you've got? To have that? Okay.
Well, yeah. So one of the concepts in permaculture is something we call stacking functions. Stacking functions is using a resource more than once. So I have an evaporative cooler here at the urban farm. Basically, it's a swamp cooler. It uses water to cool the air in the summertime. That water is flushed out periodically, and that water goes into a fish pond. Then the fish poop in the water, and that water from the fish pond gets pushed out into the garden. So now all of a sudden I have this water resource that I've used 3 times. Yeah. I used it to help cool my house. I used it to house the fish, and then I used it to fertilize the gardens.
Yeah, it makes very rich soil, like with the...
And it makes very rich soil.
Awesome.
So that's that notion of stacking functions. And chickens are another great way to stack functions in your yard. That's because chickens, what do? They eat weeds, they eat bugs, they poop, so they make fertilizer for you. They're great diggers, and they give you eggs. And if you want to go there, they give you meat. So, again, that's another asset that you can use in this notion of stacking functions. You have them do multiple things for you.
Yeah, I love it. That's so fun.
More permaculture.
Yeah. All right. So tell us, like with mentoring, tell us maybe things you've learned from mentors that you've had in your life, and then maybe ways that mentoring others, you've learned from mentoring others.
So I was in junior achievement when I was in high school. So this was like the late 70s. And Charlie was the treasurer of junior achievement, and he was this old guy. So I was 18. He was 80.
Wow.
75.
Yeah.
And he asked me to lunch one day. And it was like, yeah, right, whatever. And then a week later, he asked me to lunch again. And I was like, yeah, whatever. A week later, he asked me to lunch again. So I finally gave in and went to lunch with this old guy. And what I got to discover was this absolutely amazing man who had been in World War I. He'd been in World War II. He'd had 2 careers after that. And he was the volunteer treasurer at our local junior achievement office for 2 decades before he passed away. And he taught me how to show up and to be kind. He taught me accounting. Having Charlie as a keystone in my life has changed my life forever. So I am a big fan of having mentors, people that can see past this minutia that you have going on in your life. Call them a coach, call them a mentor. And one of the biggest things for me, both as being a mentor and being a mentee, is knowing how to show up. When I mentor young people, one of the things that I'm looking for is the people that show up. I had this young man. So we do woofing here. Do you know the woofing program?
No, I don't.
It's an acronym. It's WWOOF. And it stands for something like Willing Workers on Organic Farms. It's an international program. Generally, younger people, they travel from farm to farm around the world. And in exchange for room and board, they work on your farm.
Oh,
it is
cool.
A really, really cool program. And I've had woofers, is what they call them. I've had woofers come to the house for 15 years. I've probably had 40 different woofers come along. And now I don't do it so much anymore. The people that I do engage with are the people that really know how to show up. And what I mean by that is if somebody reaches out to me once and wants my attention, I'll send them a polite response and give them an assignment. And if they do the assignment and get back to me, then we can engage again. And I'll engage them 2 or 3 different times that way to see how they show up. Because what I'm really looking for are the people that really know how to show up in the world.
Yeah.
And so I had this young man, he was on his way to medical school, believe it or not. A year and a half ago, he decided he wanted to woof here at the urban farm. And I put him through, sorry, Forrest, if you're listening, I put him through the ringer on getting me engaged because I wasn't all that interested in engaging a woofer at that moment. And he just kept showing up and kept showing up and kept showing up. And I knew when I said, yes, you can come and work here, I knew that he was going to show up. And he worked with me for 6 months. And that boy was on time every day, worked hard for a volunteer position.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and those people that show up, they're becoming harder and harder to find. It's almost like anybody who does show up, they seem absolutely amazing anymore.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other piece of that. And I don't mean just be your embodied breathing. I mean, show up, be present, work.
Be engaged.
Really be there and be engaged. Yeah. I teach at a local university here. Arizona State University. And one of the first questions I ask the students first day of class is, who's here today? And it's interesting to see who raises their hand.
To see if they're even listening to that question,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about a little bit more about education. What books do you feel like that you've read that have been really influential in you being successful in your mission?
Yeah, so I mentioned Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. Daniel Quinn has a whole series of books, Ishmael, My Ishmael, Story of Bee. Go look him up, Daniel Quinn. I have read everything he has written, and I have designed my life around what I call Quinnian philosophy. What he speaks to is how do we work in the flow of nature? Again, that's permaculture. So another book I would absolutely go check out is Introduction to Permaculture. It's a, $35 book that you can get out there that's really good.
Okay, great. And what habits do you feel like you've had in your personal life that have been really helpful to you?
The biggest habit, and I mentioned this earlier already.
We talked about showing up.
Showing up. Seriously. I've had volunteers show up here at the urban farm, and I really want to knock them on the forehead and say, hello, are you in there? Being present, being engaged, getting stuff done. Here's a big one. Do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, once again, a concept that our society doesn't get a whole lot. So,
right.
Well, and I guess that's what I love about urban farming and gardening and, having like a small animal farm type of thing is that when you have those type of things, it teaches so much responsibility. It teaches hard work. It teaches the law of the harvest, which a lot of people don't understand, the seeds that they plant and the faith that it takes to grow that and type of thing.
Yep.
So there is a lot of like wonderful life lessons that you can teach yourself as well as your kids or whatever just through farming, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of things you can learn along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me more about maybe some long-term goals that you're going to have for yourself and how you're growing your mission.
Perfect. So remember that 1991 web seminar that I did?
Yeah.
That I am the person on the planet responsible for transforming how we raise food. That's what I get to take on every day. And whether it's going to be fully transformed before I leave or not, that is what I'm going to accomplish in my lifetime. I'm going to accomplish creating a platform and conversation around completely transforming our food system on the planet. So that's the big goal. In the meantime, I have a project here in town that I call the 10,000 Urban Farms Project. About 3 years ago, I was over in California talking with a friend of mine about urban farming. And, I like talking with Scott because we get into these great deep conversations. And on the way back, it's about a 6-hour drive. On the way back, I started pondering, what would it look like if every street in Phoenix, Arizona had one urban farm on it?
That'd be amazing.
It would absolutely be amazing. And it's very possible. This is not a big stretch to get here. And out of that came the concept that I called 10,000 Urban Farms in Phoenix. And right now we're sitting somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000. And here's what makes an urban farm. You need an urban farmer, so you're growing food and you're sharing it. And then the third thing is name your urban farm. Call it something, because when you name your urban farm, when you name a space, it takes on a life of its own.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
Remember I mentioned earlier in the interview with you about you naming your urban farm?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where this comes from. It's a really important thing to do because here in Phoenix, the urban farm has been being called the urban farm for 17 years now. And people know the urban farm. They also know McClendon's farm and Desert Roots farm and Wish We Had Acres and Jack's Beanstalk. These are all farm names that have been created over the past 20 years here in Phoenix that people know. They have a life of their own. It's a big part of what feeds the local food conversation is when there's farms everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and I love the idea of naming it just because I just think your responsibility that you have to that just becomes so much richer. It just becomes part of something you are and something greater than just your backyard.
Absolutely.
Right.
Exactly. Well, backyard, and I'm gonna adjust that a little bit. And front yard, we grow more food in our front yard here at the urban farm than we do in the backyard.
Yeah. I've seen different articles and pictures of people that all they have is maybe some planter boxes, or they're living in an apartment or something like that, and they're growing, they're changing the landscape.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
and about creating 10,000 urban farms, I think if we had more farms in our communities, we'd be more tolerant of each other. It just breaks my heart when I hear those stories of people who have a beautiful landscape that's all edible food, and then their neighbors are nitpicking because it's just not grass.
Right.
So,
well, we're shifting that paradigm. We're not hearing so much of that anymore. And then my third goal, our biggest challenge in growing food is seeds. There is a big corporate push right now to patent and own every seed out there, which means that you couldn't save the seeds of your lettuce if it's patented and grow it out. And there are companies out there that have said these words, that they are out to patent 100% of the food seeds.
I've heard that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the projects that I also am working on is 10,000 seed banks in Phoenix. And basically what that means is I do classes. And we do an event here in Phoenix called the Great American Seed Up. And it's an event where people come into this great big room. This past time we had 67 different varieties of seeds in buckets, and people could scoop up the seeds by the ounce. That we've got packaging for them and business cards for each of the varieties. And what we're teaching them to do, number one, because we have classes all day during that event as well. We're teaching them how to store them long term.
Which is, that's something a lot of people don't know.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
And how to store them long term, and then how to grow them out, and so on and so on. So again, it's an educational piece.
That's great. Well, and I feel silly really asking this because I think we've already talked about it, but I really love to hear your legacy and what you hope people will remember you for. I think we've discussed that, but just reiterate that for us.
The guy that changed my mind about how we raise food on the planet.
Yeah. Well, you're firing me up. This is
Nice.
Perfect thing for the Luminous Mind. So,
nice.
All right. So before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words for our listeners? And then give us your contact information of how our listeners can get in touch with you.
Perfect. So really just go out and grow something. Here's what I tell people. I promise you that I have killed many more plants than you ever will. Now, I didn't do it on purpose, but it just happened. Like I mentioned, I think I killed 2 really dear plants to me today, and it's just I wasn't paying attention. So it was something for me to learn from. So go out, take a class, take one of our free webinars, go out and figure out how to grow something, even if it's herbs in a pot. In fact, one of the things I tell people is the most expensive thing to buy in the store and the easiest thing to grow are herbs.
Yeah. And they make your food taste delicious when they're fresh.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So really, parting advice, go out and grow something. Get inspired, grow something that you can eat. Because what we do, Heidi and I here at the Urban Farm, we eat multiple things out of the yard every day.
I love that.
Every day. Our breakfast this morning came out of the yard here at the Urban Farm. It was some winter greens. Now it's winter here in Arizona. We can still grow things. So it was a mixture of winter greens, 3 or 4 different kinds of greens from the yard, and some eggs, some scrambled eggs. That was our breakfast.
Well, and doesn't give you such a sense of accomplishment to know that you've grown it and you're eating it, and that's awesome. Well, great.
Yeah, every single day. So the way to get a hold of me is go to my website, urbanfarm.org. You can find out about Urban Farm U there. Our podcast is urbanfarmpodcast.com. And, just engage with the website. If you go to the front page, on the front page of Urban Farm U, there is a free urban farming ebook by jumping onto my email list. So, your guests can get something for free and learn urban farming if they'd like.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be sure to link all those links up on our show notes so that you can go there as well if you don't go to Greg's website. But thank you so much for lighting our minds on fire. I am just so thrilled to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Greg and the Urban Farm, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out the Services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of inspiring content, go to the Sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.